In order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, from my heart I take refuge in the three jewels. In order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, from my heart I take refuge in the three jewels. In order that all sentient beings may attain Buddhahood, from my heart I take refuge in the three jewels. Whatever the virtues of the many fields of knowledge, all are steps on the path of omniscience. May these arise in the clear mirror of intellect. O Manjushri, please accomplish this. Good evening. Welcome. Nice to see everyone. Thank you all for joining on this beautiful evening as we launch into our first hot spell of the summer. Hi. So we are on page 186 of the book Moonbeams of Mahamudra.
Could I get a little more? You're in chapter 7, Mahamudra approach?
I was just about to do that for you digitoids. So we are in the chapter on shamatha, which, as you said, is chapter number 8. Sorry, not 7. And in that chapter, we're in the fourth part of the instructions in shamatha, which is called the actual objects for practicing mental stillness. And we're a little bit into that chapter or that section, the actual objects. We're in the section called the actual objects of meditation. And this has a very interesting discussion of what types of objects are appropriate, where the author puts forward his view that sticks and pebbles are appropriate objects. And there's a discussion of like whether those are conceptual or not. And I think the consensus was that initially when we meditate on the proliferation of thoughts that happens in the sixth consciousness after a sense perception, and that gradually as we progress in meditation we get closer and closer to the actual sense perception, which is a non-conceptual cognition, whereas the mental consciousness quickly goes from non-conceptual to conceptual. So gradually over time our mental consciousness gravitates, relaxes into the coming closer and closer to the moment of direct cognition of the sense consciousness by the mental consciousness. And let's see, so maybe we should read this paragraph on 186 again just to reconnect us. Nevertheless, we may wonder, and so that's after a quote about Bindu's saying, focusing on what is based on the body's fivefold, focusing on the breath, subtle symbols, Bindu's, light rays, joy and bliss. And excuse me 1 second here. Nevertheless, we may wonder, is it wrong to cultivate mental stillness on the basis of a sense consciousness looking at an external substance, such as a pebble or a twig, when mental stillness must be cultivated with the mental consciousness? So the assumption is that samadhi must be cultivated on the mental consciousness. There's nothing wrong with that. The visual consciousness serves as the primary initiator of movement towards objects for the sense consciousness. The key point is that most movements of the mental consciousness are related to the sense consciousnesses. By holding a gaze where the visual faculty does not move, that sense consciousness does not move, and the movements of the other sense consciousnesses are minimized. When those do not move, the mental consciousness's movements decrease, and this technique makes developing stillness easy. So as we see, the point of this is to develop stillness, and so we can settle into the still mind as opposed to being stuck in the moving mind, which is where we spend most of our time. Directing the mental and visual consciousness towards something like a pebble or a twig is merely a symbol, reminding the mind to not wander, not be distracted somewhere else. It is analogous to remembering a point on the basis of a mnemonic. The symbols used for settling the mind are not just one prescribed object of meditation, because even in the descriptions of the symbols of unpleasantness, such as a rotting image, there are many different kinds of symbols. And so he's referring to the famous 9 stages of decomposition of a corpse or a body, going from a fresh corpse to a decaying corpse to a skeleton. That is practiced in certain traditions of Buddhism as a way of developing absence of attachment to the physical body. Let's see, there are many different kinds of symbols. There are many other presentations, including settling the mind on the form of a letter, a sound, light, or a name. And in the Vajrayana practices, we become familiar with settling the mind on letters, sounds, lights. I don't know about a name. Also, the stages of meditation by Kamala Shila explains that the objects for shamatha are not just one prescribed object of meditation. So there's some sense of gaining proficiency by focusing on different objects of meditation. Now, technically, we're taught to focus on the breath, but we're also asked to have attention on the posture and also to pay attention to thoughts. And as thoughts decrease, we gain more focus on the breath and use the posture as a ground from which we then experience the so-called space around us. And Trungpa Rinpoche also notes that the space is also internal, the space around thoughts, meaning the still mind, since the objective is ultimately to have the still mind as the object of meditation. But that's getting ahead of ourselves, so let's wait on that. That said, among these approaches, concentrating on the Tathagata's form is laudable. The Sutra of the Questions of Bhajrapala states, Bhajrapala, it is like this: just as I am now seated before you and teaching the Dharma, bodhisattvas should bring to mind the Tathagatas. Seated on Buddha's thrones and expounding the Dharma, they should bring to mind the Tathagatas, who have all the most sublime attributes, have a perfect form, are beautiful and lovely to behold, and are endowed with the most excellent body. They should meditate on the minor marks of the Tathagatas, each one of which is generated by 100 merits. And so this is a common theme in Mahayana Buddhism, is focusing on the form of a Buddha for one's meditation practice, and noticing the major and minor marks of the form of the Tathagata, the Nirmanakaya. There are many such statements as cited above in the King of Samadhi Sutra. The protector of the world is beautiful in all ways, with a body like the color of gold, which is one of the marks of a Buddha, is that his body shines like gold and emanates a golden radiance that extends like 7 somethings in each direction, fathoms or something. I don't know, fathoms, maybe too far. The final, meaning third stages of meditation, also states that Arya Shura and the exalted Lord Atisha explain that when first seeking mental stillness among the many objects of meditation, it is best to practice with whatever object we find suitable. The first stages of meditation teaches that once we have developed mental stillness, we can train with any object. For example, within the sutra-oriented approaches, there are numerous explanations of the objects of meditation for purifying previous behavior, purifying mental afflictions, and so on, which were described earlier when he went through the various objects of meditation using the fourfold scheme. One of the schemes was purifying behavior and cultivating loving kindness to overcome anger and so forth. In the practice lineage, these approaches are referred to using the term with support, because the mind rests either on something actual as its support for concentration, such as a pebble or a twig, or on a support that is visualized by the mind, such as a bindu, which would be a dot, a sphere. So this is within the realm of developing shamatha on the basis of a support. The identification of mental stillness. So this is key. How do I identify mental stillness? Since this is the first exercise in the Vipassana section, is identifying the still mind as opposed to the moving mind. Although broadly speaking, there are many instances of mental stillness. In this context, we are cultivating the aspect of resting in non-conceptuality. Talopa explains, give up physical activities and be at ease. Don't talk a lot. It's just echoes, meaning view your speech as just echoes. Echoes meaning like not really said by anybody and not really having any meaning and not really directed towards any purpose. Don't think, behold the phenomena of the breakthrough. Famous phrase translated by Trungpa Rinpoche as something like behold the dharma of the gap, or the leap, the great leap, I think he said, not the gap, but it is basically talking about the gap. Acharya Dignaga teaches always reject the multitude of concepts, objects, subjects, duality, non-duality, self, others, nirvana, samsara, and remain in equipoise. At this point in training in mental stillness, most will find it difficult to give rise to flawless shamatha, samadhi. Therefore, you should use focal supports to reverse your previous habit of letting your mind ramble. When, within non-wandering mindfulness, without any thoughts popping up, your mind relaxes and is tranquil for any length of time, you have achieved a small degree of stillness. And an essential part of the ingredients for succeeding in experiencing mental stillness is the relaxation of the mind, as opposed to the forceful effort of the mind. The habit pattern of the mind is effort to occupy itself, to do something. And that has a momentum, a huge karmic momentum that perpetuates that pattern ceaselessly unless we interrupt it. And one of the best ways of interrupting it is to relax the mind and just completely relax it. The initial technique is to give the mind's one thing to focus on so that it stops going all over the place like it usually does. While in a state of stillness, interrupt that, take a break for a short period, then continue as before. So this might seem odd, like when it's going well, you're supposed to interrupt that and take a break. Why would that be? Why would we want to interrupt stillness when we're actually experiencing it? Rob, go for it.
Um, I think it has to do with interrupting the project of a self so that you don't take any credit.
And become attached.
Well, yeah, so that it becomes a thing. It's like letting go in a way.
Experiencing echo.
You're,
So
Yeah,
I'm not going to say.
it's exactly that. It's the echoes. It's because there's always a little bit of analysis happening, even in the extreme background, and so that analysis wants to become something, and you kind of
Do its
cut it
thing.
off.
I'm going to wait and mute. How's that? Now it doesn't happen. There's something spooky between Rob and I going on. Anyway, thank you for that. If non-conceptuality becomes something stagnant, Mary Beth,
How do you how do you take a break? Do you just like think about stuff intentionally?
yeah, look around, check out your surroundings, see what time it is. You know, I think we're all pretty good at that.
Hmm.
Shift to different objects. You know, look at the posture, refresh the posture, check out the space around you.
So then the hard part is finding it. Because once you found it, you can keep it. But if you lose it, then you can't. So you have to practice that.
You have to practice going into it. So to go into it again, you have to practice going out of it.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's the key point, right? Practicing going into it. Cynthia.
Well, I was going to say, and then there's the question of are we really keeping it? You know, that to actually sustain it for any great length of time. The question is it truly stillness, or does it start to have, other subtle things going on that we may not notice, or something like that? So, um,
Yeah, clearly for quite a long time it's not true stillness, until we achieve certain level, advanced level of the nine stages, if not the complete. If non-conceptuality becomes something stagnant, having trailed off into a lack of mindfulness, that is a problem. Energize yourself and increase the intensity of your mindfulness. So, it's really helpful to know how to energize and intensify your awareness. And sometimes often people like ask, how do we do that in meditation? I think we're all very good at doing it in situations where we need to, like in emergencies. We're very good at that. So just think of that frame of reference, but without the panic aspect to it. But figure out how to energize. How do I energize my practice? How do I increase the clarity and the intensity of my awareness? Continue to do this repeatedly for short periods. So energize and relax, energize and relax. If your mindfulness does not completely fade away, but stillness seems dull, sometimes you can continue with that for brief periods, since it is a problem that will automatically correct itself. If you continue with it while you're knowing that it's dull, it should actually thereby clarify the dullness by knowing it, I think is what he's saying. While you remain in a state of mindfulness, if there is a small degree of stillness along with a seeming increase in thoughts, it is that previously you did not notice that your thoughts came in a line. We thought they came in circles or something, or I don't know, different formations, but apparently they come in a line, like lambs linked together. That's a great analogy. And we've all been through this, where initially you start meditating and it's sort of peaceful, and then at some point thoughts seem to be increasing. And it's purely because, well, they claim it's because it was that way all along, and we didn't notice it. I also tend to think that the mind reacts against the effort to calm it and drums up more activity. But what do I know? While you remain in a state of stillness, if there is a small degree of stillness, sorry, we did that. Now you notice that they arise one after another, infallibly rather, one after another. You have achieved a small degree of stillness, so do not regard this as a problem. That's a sign of accomplishment, is realizing that all there are thoughts, endless thoughts. Relax your sense of expectation. So the expectation to be able to meditate without thoughts becomes a problem because there's just tons of thoughts. So we need to relax our expectation and learn to accept thoughts as much as you can and simply be undistracted in a state with little suppression or promotion, not inhibiting thoughts or pursuing them. Wonderful seeming contradiction between undistracted and thoughts or thinking. So letting that stream of thoughts go on, but being undistracted. So what does that mean? What are we undistracted from then?
Awareness.
Awareness, yeah.
Awareness of awareness? I don't know that we're there yet.
I don't
Well,
know.
I mean,
I'm
there's
sorry?
different levels of it. Go ahead.
No, it's, yeah, it's kind of hard to explain, but it's almost like awareness of, oh, yeah, it is awareness of awareness. It's aware of that you're aware and not distracted.
Sue, Mary Beth, Emily.
Mhm. Well, I was going to say in all of this that there's sort of a way of meditating that happens where it's, awareness and kind of emptiness. And then there's, phenomenon that are happening, but sometimes you're just straight on. It seems like it's sort of empty to empty. And so I don't know if that's what it is about
Thank
for
you.
me.
It's hard to say exactly, but I think it's helpful to think about Mary Beth and then Emily.
I was going to say, not be distracted from the constant stream of thoughts, because usually we jump on one and go with it for a while and then realize that's happened and we have to come back. And I think then that coming back is not necessarily to things being quiet and still, but just coming back to being aware that it's just, always, you're just always on the verge of any number of different thoughts you could have. They're just always some.
I like that. Thank you very much, Emily.
I may be way oversimplifying here, but I was going to say not distracted from the still, nor the still mind and the moving mind. those two.
Those two as sort of summing up everything.
Basically, yeah.
To me, it feels like we're undistracted from the feeling of thinking. I think initially when we meditate, we're in the content of thought, and we're attracted to what the thoughts are about. And gradually, as we relax the framework of thinking, and we shift our attitude towards thoughts, so we don't view thoughts as important, as having important content, and instead we just feel movement. We just feel the continual movement. It's like, what's the feeling of thinking? Rob?
Yes, that's I think really well said. We're changing our relationship to the chatter, and we're not even we're getting close to the point of not feeling like we're even the author of it anymore. It's
It's
more like
playing
it's just yeah, it's just it's like echoes, like Talopa said, it's noise, and it's just a human mind and not necessarily Rob that's authoring this. You know,
It's
it's
somebody else in there.
well, it's unfindable. You know, there's no someone even. You know, it's just it's just what human minds do. They think, and so we stop we start loosening the project of building a self around them.
There's a great analogy that they use, which is it's like an older person, like a grandparent or something, um, with their child and their grandchild at a park, and their child is watching the grandchildren, so the grandparent doesn't have to be worried, and the children are just running around talking this and that. So the grandparent just hears all the chatter, but there's absolutely zero like attraction towards what's the content of the chatter. Or like being in a crowd and just like hearing all this chattering going on, but like it doesn't involve us.
Right, and the chatter's still always there. It's just that it sort of just fades a little bit into the background, and there are other things that are more interesting even.
Emily again.
Oh,
One question I have though is even the feeling of the thoughts, wouldn't that also be part of the moving mind? So
Yes,
there's then
totally.
also, okay. So then there's also still mind sort of next to that or in addition to that.
Uh, um, well, we have yet to like figure out what the still mind is.
Right. Okay.
But there, one of the big questions with the still mind and the moving mind is, can they both be present at the same time? Or does one negate the other? And so traditionally there's this analogy of shamatha being like the process of a pond of water that has been churned up, let's say, by some boats or people swimming in it. Stuff, particulates, mud, or whatever has been churned up by their activity. And then gradually it subsides. There's no more activity in the pond, and the silt gradually falls down to the bottom of the pond and the water clears. So in that case, the silt is what? In terms of movement and stillness, the silt is
Movement.
movement. And what's the stillness?
Settledness.
Settledness. And so what's the water?
At that moment, it would be clear.
Wow, I was muted to do that code.
Right. I think it's Rob. Yeah.
How about if the
So,
water is the stillness?
well, but I mean, the water, you're talking about the still water could be stillness, but if the water has waves, would you still call it stillness?
Yes.
So you're saying the silt is the movement and the water is not. I mean, obviously, it all depends on what definitions you want to use.
Yeah, but it's a interesting one to think about, like the pond or the snow globe. What is the flakes, the particulates, and what is the liquid that it's in? Sue, and then let's go on.
Okay, so aren't the thoughts empty too? I mean, if things are um, not there and are empty, then can't you just, they're just there? It's just, you see right through them at times, not always. Sometimes it all falls apart and you're grabbing everything, but it seems like if you are completely, if there's that relaxation, then
Well, I'm with you on the quality of non-attachment to the content of thoughts, but I don't think we've seen thoughts to be empty yet because we haven't done the Vipassana and we haven't really experienced emptiness. But we've lost the allure. The allure of the content of thoughts is diminished, which is what I started with. But it's interesting. So let's go on and see if it clarifies. Let's see. Alternatively, if you are not sure whether your mind is still or moving, that indicates a somewhat weaker intelligence, which is like not a, I don't, that's not like an innate intelligence. It's just like an undeveloped experiencer of those states, right? In which case, after a sudden loud noise in between the cessation of one thought and before the next one arises, notice that an open, crisp state of mind occurs, the gap, the crisp. Since you can understand that to be a sign of the mind's non-conceptuality, extending that experience just a bit will produce stillness. I love the way he says produce stillness as if it's a created state. But so allowing gaps to extend and relaxing the propensity to identify a gap as a gap, which is what generally closes a gap when you think, oh, that was a gap. We should know that these techniques are also appropriate for objects of meditation that use the breath, which will be explained next. The objects of meditation involving characteristics without supports. This is two parts, those that use the breath and those that do not use the breath. So in this case, characteristics is the larger category. There's objects or meditation with characteristics and without, and within with characteristics, there's with support and without. And so here we have characteristics without. Those that use the breath has two sections, concentrating on counting and concentrating on filling. Concentrating on counting in general, both the sutras and tantras teach using the breath as a means for developing mental stillness. In this regard, Talopa says if those of lesser intelligence can't rest in that state, they should use the technique of the breath and extract awareness. What an interesting statement. Extract awareness. The sutra, and presumably the first sentence, if one can't rest in that state, presumably meaning the state of stillness, the sutra-oriented texts on the stages of meditation teach that those with a predominance of thoughts should meditate on the breath And so we we look around, and every Tibetan teacher, Buddhist teacher, teaches the breath. And so that seems to indicate that there's a predominance of thoughts in the West, which is not surprising given our karmic momentum. The explanation of the treasury of Abhidharma, the Abhidharma Kosha Bhashya, explains this approach. So this is a famous presentation that Vasubandhu goes through of 6 stages of working with the breath that Asanga then explains further in his Shravaka Bhumi, which is not yet translated, although available. That section is available in limited situations, such as Alan Wallace taught on it a couple of years ago or so, and circulated a draft translation. But it appears that this framework of the 6 stages of working with the breath are basically the framework for working with the breath in the Tibetan tradition as a whole, including Mahamudra and Dzogchen. And the stages are interpreted somewhat differently than in the earlier tradition. So first, let's see. There are 6 ways to practice mindfulness of the breath: counting, following, settling, examining, changing, and purifying. Counting, concentrate by focusing on counting the inhalations and exhalations of the breath from 21 times to a panipala, then a gatika, counting flawlessly. I didn't look these up. Anybody know what a panipala is? A gatika is like a 24-minute period, I think, right? And we all know how many breaths there are in a day, right?
The other one is 24 seconds.
24 seconds, that's cool. And then 24 minutes, that's neat. Number of breaths in a day, 21,600, right? Following, after that, asking whether the breath goes everywhere in the body or just to one place. Focus on following and reversing it throughout your entire body. What an interesting idea. Breathing into and out of your entire body, as opposed to what is normally considered to be technically happening. Although scientifically there's a very small amount of sort of minuscule amount of respiration that happens throughout the pores of the skin. Settling, place your mind on your breath pervading everywhere and on non-conceptuality specifically. Examine the non-referential essence of breath. So there seems to be a little shift there to Vipassana, examining. Changing, move the mind that is focused on the breath to another object of meditation for shamatha. And in the Mahamudra tradition, this other object becomes mind. Shamatha without characteristics, purifying. Meditate within non-conceptuality, where thoughts of percepts and perceivers have been purified, and that can be understood as a summary of the stages of Vipassana meditation. In the mantra-oriented approaches, there are many variations on the ways to meditate with the breath, but I will not go into them out of a concern of it becoming too much. At this point, I will explain the teachings found in the esoteric instructions of the practice lineage on the ways to cultivate mental stillness based on counting the breath and filling with it, the first two. Counting is commended in the Sutra of the 10 Wheels of Kshitigarbha, who is the bodhisattva of earth or something like that, or maybe space. How do we examine the internal and external movements of the breath in a precise way using mindfulness? By counting them precisely. It continues, those who remain in meditative concentration while being mindful of the comings and goings of the breath are said to be sentient beings who abide in the true Dharma, the ultimate. They're said to be cultivating true meditative concentration precisely. That's a heavy endorsement for meditating on the breath. The Samvara Udaya, which is a tantra, states, yogins and yoginis resting in equipoise should count the breaths that enter up to 100,000 and more, sort of like doing Nundro, using the breath. Always doing the repetitions without a sound, so not counting out loud. The practitioner who silently completes 100,000 repetitions will, without a doubt, live for 5 more years, even though their life should be over. And this is a wonderful statement. We see this here and there in the lives of some of the siddhas, like I think Talopa was supposed to die as a very young boy, and his life was extended. There's this idea in the West, in the East, sorry, or in India, Indian-based traditions in general, that there's a thing called life force. And we all have a sort of predetermined life force that has a our life force has a predetermined expanse or time period. And so you'll see this in various lamas, great lamas' life stories. They say, by doing this practice, I was able to extend my life another 7 years or some extension of time. Often it's 7 years. Tibetans are big on 7-year time periods. So by doing this, by 100,000, counting 100,000 breaths, you could live 5 more years than you're supposed to, than you're allotted.
And if there's 21,000 in a day, that's 5 days at least of nonstop counting. So if you go to sleep, then I guess you need 10 days.
And if you miss
one, but you breathe.
Yeah,
but
sorry, Rob, I muted
you need to count them all.
Yeah, you have to count them.
So you can't
counting while you're sleeping.
Yeah, counting and sleeping is sort of difficult.
It's like counting sheep. Now, using the previously described essential points for the body, the gazes. Settle your mind naturally. So the gaze is up close, right? We went through that. Like you're looking up close at the space in front of your nose. People should try that, by the way. If you haven't tried that, you should try that. The breath through your nostrils should not be forced, noisy, or rough. Inhale and exhale gently. When exhaling, do so with mindfulness. When inhaling, concentrate with mindfulness. Do not be distracted to anything else. You should train by it. So he was not taught Trungpa Rinpoche's technique of letting go of the in-breath. Shh, don't tell him. When inhaling, concentrate with mindfulness. Do not be distracted to anything else. You should train by first simply concentrating for 3 rounds, then just for 5, later 7, as you can. In between, take short breaks. Finally, your training should build up to concentrating with uninterrupted mindfulness for 100 rounds of breath. For those who have achieved mental stillness in the context of previous mental concentrations, this approach will bring proficiency. For those who have not achieved that, these are wonderful instructions for pursuing stillness. Therefore, it is important to apply yourself to them. So, Trungpa Rinpoche, in his seminary teachings, which are now encapsulated in the profound treasury of the Ocean of Dharma, in the volume 1 of that, talks about counting breaths as a traditional practice in the Kagyu tradition, but says that he doesn't feel that's necessary or helpful for people at this time, interestingly. And traditionally, the counting was done, you would count downward instead of upward. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, which I think requires a little bit more attention than counting upward. You can do in your sleep, so to speak, right? You can just like set your brain to count and it'll just do that while you do all sorts of other things. Overall, there are 2 ways filling the breath can be used as a technique for cultivating mental stillness: by stopping it naturally and using vase breathing, the famous vase breathing. The Vajradhaka explains The Vajradhaka is a person or a being as well as a text. When filling makes your body full, poisons and the fevers of flu are vanquished. When Vaz breathing binds your doors, the pathways of your sense doors are purified. And Vaz breathing, binding your doors refers to closing off your apertures. The Sambarayodaya Tantra says those who practice Vaz breathing are always victorious over death with awareness of your nature. Fill everywhere with breath as far as your souls. Even though there is no soul in Buddhism, they still talk about that. But I think he means the bottom of your feet. Stabilize Vaz breathing. It is taught that Vaz breathing involves uniting the upper and lower winds. As the Sampradaya Tantra states, with the mind, unite the winds that move above and below. Familiarity with that yoga brings the attainment of a stable state. The Kalachakra Tantra also explains the mouth is closed. Through both nostrils, all the external winds are drawn in by the force of the life force wind and united with the downward expelling wind, which is like pure lightning. In time, through the yoga, being familiar with this, they become of equal taste in the middle of the moon, sun, and fire. I have a feeling the moon, sun, and fire refer to some esoteric part of the subtle body, but I don't know. Who knows? This eliminates physical thirst, hunger for food, and the like, and confers immortality. Hold on one second. It's important to know the key points of the 4 yogic techniques for this practice. As Naropa says, if you do not know the 4 yogic techniques, inhaling, filling, dispersing, and releasing like an arrow, there's the danger that good qualities will become problems. So these are 4 stages or aspects of the Vaz breath. And nevertheless, since in this context the instruction manuals do not provide detailed explanations of the esoteric instructions on breath yoga, filling with breath is simply an ancillary practice for concentrating the mind. Fill your body with breath, hold it as much as you can, and within that seek a non-conceptual resting state. This is done as follows. Do the preliminaries of letting your breath settle gently, expelling the stale breath, which is often done in a series of 9 breaths, 3 for each nostril separately, closing off the other, and then 3 having both open. Use the gazes and the essential points for the body as before. Inhale a breath fully and slowly through both nostrils without making a noise, panting, or breathing unevenly. Press it down slightly to the lower part of your abdomen. This is the key part, is learning how to bring the air down to the lower part of the body, which really means to the lower part of the lungs, since that's what's going on. And to do that, you push the abdomen down and allow the bottom parts of the lungs to expand, I believe. Keep your upper body area spacious and light, so sort of extended. Hold your breath as long as it is not uncomfortable. When it becomes uncomfortable and you want to exhale, do so immediately and smoothly without any sound or unevenness. All the phases, from inhaling the breath, holding it internally, to releasing it, should be done within a state of undistracted mindfulness as before. Particularly as long as you hold the breath internally, there should be a continuous flow of resting that is open, crisp, and awake. Now, generally, or at least in Trungpa Rinpoche's tradition, we recommend that students not do this type of Vaz breathing until they've been introduced to it within the context of Vajrayana practice, in a way that actually goes through the subtleties of it. But I know other teachers teach it more openly.
Derek?
So
Yes.
we actually just discussed this over the weekend, this past week with Mayor Rinpoche, because he talks about this a fair amount. And we did the ninefold breath, and then he was talking about the vase breathing, and it's basically, from what it sounds like to me, so it's sort of like you press down with the diaphragm, and then he also said you pull up from the root chakra, and then you're sort of like holding the breath, the wind energy, around your navel, and that while you're holding this, you continue to breathe normally. And this is supposed to quiet your mind or reduce the agitation or whatever. So I'm guessing that that's what he's talking about.
It felt a little confusing when you said you're holding your breath, but you're breathing naturally
You're
at
holding
the
the
same time.
muscles. You're holding the muscles, but you're not holding your breath. I mean, he said you can hold your breath and, hold it until it becomes uncomfortable. But then he said you can also hold this like it's, you start off holding the breath and you can get to the point where you're not holding your breath anymore, and it sounded to me like you could stay in this state indefinitely where you're, pushing down with the diaphragm and pulling up with the root chakra, and then you're continuing to breathe normally, but it's like it pulls the energy down towards the navel chakra, and this is supposed to calm agitation and quiet the mind or whatever. That's the way I understood it.
Cool. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. So there's also, in some traditions, a distinction between what's called the small vase breath and the greater vase breath. And the pulling up the root chakra is also referring to what Tashi Namgyo referred to earlier as closing off, binding your doors, if you know what that means. Do that for 3 rounds to begin with, and increase to 5, 7, and so on as possible. Then take a break. When you're accustomed to this, you can lengthen your sessions. During this practice, if your mind becomes agitated, just be aware of the distraction and keep your mind internally relaxed. Relaxed within agitation, within distraction. If you feel more disturbed, you are exhausted and need to remedy this as much as if you feel more disturbed, that means you are exhausted and need to remedy this as much as you can. If you become dizzy or lightheaded, you should eat nourishing food and get massages. I like that part. Since your winds have become somewhat unsettled, the technique of holding the breath itself will not increase dullness. However, should that happen, direct your gaze upwards with intensity, as long as you are not swept away by the undercurrents of thoughts. Do not regard the arising of small thoughts within a state of mindfulness as problematic or cause for alarm. Again, arouse the force of mindfulness. Your state of mind should be like something that is taut or firm at the bottom, but relaxed at the top. That's the best one. That's the best. That's the funniest analogy I think he gives in the whole book. So your state of mind should be like something that is taut or firm at the bottom, but relaxed at the top. What is it that's firm at the bottom and relaxed at the top? Sue.
Well, it reminds me a little bit of Chogyam Trungpa's meditation instruction, in that your body, and so that's sort of firm, and then you go out, and that's, relaxed.
That's neat. Thank you. He also has Trungpa Rinpoche has an interesting phrase that he uses to describe thoughts that occur, the way that we experience thoughts as we progress in shamatha. Anybody remember what that is? Similar to
Flat,
this one.
Flat bottom?
flat bottom.
Flat bottom thoughts. That's it.
That's body, mindfulness of body. Go.
So we're talking about the quality of the movement of thought and not the content, right?
Yeah.
But what an interesting phrase, like trying to figure out, what does that mean? Tight at the bottom and loose at the top. Now, partially it's referring to closing off the doors, or root chakra, as Tara was saying, down below, and you're breathing freely up above and through your nostrils. But I think it also has an implication for the quality of the experience of movement. Chris?
Yeah, for me, firm at the bottom is when I roll my pelvis forward. Like I start slouching, and if I do that, and then I feel firm at the bottom, and then take that breath down. And yeah, that for me, it's rolling my pelvis forward.
Yeah, that's certainly part of it. Thank you. It's like finding the right posture, and that shifting the pelvis so that it's flat, correctly positioned, helps also close off the door down there and create that flat bottom experience. Those are ancillary practices. So all of this, the vase breathing, is all ancillary practice for concentrating the mind, since they are said to be esoteric instructions for settling the mind that has not settled. By the end, you will certainly discover non-conceptual stillness. So they're esoteric, and so Trungpa Rinpoche never taught these openly. Other teachers have different views on that, and some teachers, you go and they'll teach you the nine fold cleansing right away, and and vase breathing, but it varies. Anyway, by the end, you will certainly discover non-conceptual stillness.
Well, I think, as you said before, when they describe all these things like becoming dizzy and lightheaded, the other thing you should do besides getting a massage is stop doing that practice if you don't have guidance. Just as Derek said, it is not safe necessarily to do this if you're having any kind of effects. So it's,
Yes, thank you so much for saying that.
yeah.
Definitely, I missed saying that.
Basically,
Yeah.
both Mingyur Rinpoche and Sokti Rinpoche, they teach the very gentle style of vase breathing, the gentle vase breathing, but they also don't recommend it highly for a lot of, it's, as you said, it's not really a safe thing because there's all kinds of different things that can come up. Everybody's different. And so you don't want to,
Yeah, that's really helpful.
don't muscle
Insight there.
through it. Do not muscle through it.
Yeah, it's not a forceful thing, even though there are parts of the language like the releasing and has this forceful description. It should be done very gently.
Yeah, Mingyur Rinpoche says it should be he calls it a 10% effort. Only not a lot of force
That's
applied.
great. It's not like we're
Yeah.
like doing an athletic type of
No.
thing. Yeah, because it's a very gentle way of sort of settling the energy in the body, basically, which is what they call the winds. Then we have part B, those that do not use the breath. Whatever stillness has been achieved through those ancillary practices for concentrating the mind is refined by using the following practices that do not involve a support or a reference point. Adopt the essential points for the body as before. Do not do any practice that involves focusing or concentrating the mind as anything, such as on an external focal support or the internal comings and goings of the breath. Your mind should have no support at all and not be disturbed by any concepts about attention. Leave your mind in its own state. That's probably the hardest thing to do. What state is that? New York or like California, maybe? Do not think about the past, about what you've done before or things that have happened. Do not speculate about the future, what you may do or how you may do it. Do not engage in analysis of the present, what is around you now, or what appears to be the case. Leave your mind to be free, loose, and unconstrained. The Guhya Samaja Tantra describes this way to rest as follows. Make mind be not mind. That's simple and straightforward now, isn't it? Then do not think about anything. Make mind to be not mind. So you're not minding. The Doha for the people, which is one of Sarha's famous trilogy, Doha trilogy, one for the king, one for the queen, and one for everybody else, says, cast away thoughts and their objects, and you'll rest like a small child. When, not attending to anything, you leave mind to be like space, the winds of thoughts are bound, and an unmoving stillness of mind arises. The Doha for the people says, when mind is taken to be like space. Ah, that sounds familiar. Mind taken to be like space. The winds of thoughts are bound in an unmoving stillness of mind. Sorry.
It doesn't say thoughts there.
No, I read the lead in again by mistake. When mind is taken to be like space, the winds are bound, recognizing their equality, they dissolve, they being the winds. Sarha says, when you have this ability, you can quickly abandon the impermanent and the moving. It is explained that when we stabilize our mind as unmoving and non-conceptual, immediately some signs of the external and internal winds dissolving will arise, and in the end we will be liberated from the things of samsara. That was quick. We're still in the shamaja section, and we're being liberated. So we stabilize our minds as being unmoving and non-conceptual, and we mind is taken to be like space. That's the sort of ultimate analogy for mind that Trungpa Rinpoche uses, of course, in his technique, and just so common in Saraha and other tantric teachings, Mahamudra teachings. The Kalachakra Tantra teaches, once you leave all thoughts behind, look closely for one day. If no signs arise, I am a liar. But the condition was leaving all thoughts behind, and then look closely for a day. The Doha for the people states, when your mind is unmoving, stable in its own place, it is self-liberated from the things of samsara.
So do you think he's saying no thoughts arise at all, or you're just leaving them behind?
Well, he's not completely clear about that, is he? Um, it certainly seems like there's a reduction in the intensity of thoughts. We can't really, or we often say like the amount of thoughts, but or like the duration of thoughts. But thoughts don't really. There's like not. You can't really count thoughts because they don't have a beginning and end. And it's hard to see, how long was that thought? Was that a long thought or a short thought? But it, I think the implication is quite clear that the intensity or the dominance of thoughts diminishes radically.
Yeah, I think the relationship changes radically.
We shift our allegiance from the flag to the mind.
I was actually doing that this past week. I would, because I've never really, the breath didn't work well for me, but I said, okay, my mind is the object. And it did help cut off the thoughts. Now, I didn't get liberated. and when the thoughts came back, it didn't change their quality, but it, I just, I don't, I would use my mind as the object. I would just like focus on my mind. And it did tend to hold those thoughts off. If they started coming up, I didn't, but I didn't get liberated.
I love the way you touched your forehead and indicated that your mind was located there as you were focusing on your mind and touching this area because that's where your mind is.
Yeah, I thought about that. I was like, well, what am I focusing on? Because I'm looking at my mind and I'm like, well, but it
Yeah,
was interesting.
it's quite difficult, I think, to separate or identify the the aspect of mind as separate from its contents, and actually to be mindful of mind, or practice shamatha on the nature of the mind. What does that mean? We know the mind has certain qualities of being empty and reflecting clearly, and a knowing quality. So can we actually focus our attention on those three qualities without it sort of dissolve, without it our attention going into the content that the mind is experiencing? That's very hard, right? And that's the culmination of this shamatha process, the shamatha without without support and without characteristics. So let's continue. With this approach to pursuing mental stillness, you should train by doing many short sessions. And we talked about the difference between sessions and what we, in this tradition, which versus what we call a session. A session in this tradition is like where you have equipoise. And when equipoise dissolves, meaning you become distracted, that's the end of a session. As before, if your mind, and so the idea is that um, as we practice more and more, we gain the ability to remain in equipoise for short periods of time. And instead of like prolonging those because we have an idea that we're going to meditate for a certain number of minutes, um, we've affiliated the idea of a session with those number of minutes. Let's say it's 45 minutes or 30 minutes or 24 minutes, and we think, oh, at the end of those minutes is the end of the session. For them, it's like the end of a session is when you go from equipoise to distraction, and then you rest, you look around, as we mentioned a minute ago, and then you come back into trying to experience equipoise. If your mind is dull, energize it. So again, we really need to like find something that energizes our mind. Panic energizes our mind, but it's not particularly helpful in the context of meditation. But it might be helpful, like to just like sort of experience, like what is it like? What is the crisp quality of our awareness that happens when there is urgency, a sense of urgency? Right? If it is agitated, relax your expectations. If your mind is sluggish and you're unable to arouse clarity and lucidity, or if your mind seems unworkable, the esoteric instructions recommend doing something else, like prostrations and confessions of negative actions in front of special objects of worship, and making strong supplications for samadhi to arise, or building towers like Milarepa did. If in this context of not using a support or reference point, it isn't easy to apply whatever slight degree of stillness you may have achieved previously, you won't be able to make progress with practices that are without characteristics. Since again, in this scheme, there's there's with characteristics that has support, and with characteristics without support, and then there's without characteristics as the culmination. So if you can't do with characteristics without support, meaning focusing on the stillness, basically they're saying using the support as the what the question is, if this is characteristics but not without a support, characteristics without a support, what is the characteristic that we're meditating on? And, we had some statements about space, um, using breath to then experience space. Up at the top of the page, leave your mind to be like space. Let's see. Therefore, it is important to train with these methods first. These approaches of pursuing mental stillness with the breath or without the breath do not involve using an object with a shape and color, such as a pebble or a twig, as a support for the mind. And to some extent, they're using the breath as being without support, right?
Right.
Therefore,
That's where Trugam Chungpa really had that great program where there's a lot of breath, and then there's less breath, and then there's even less, and then it's just field of awareness. So he guided us through that.
I'm waiting for you to be finished and mute. So what I think Rob is referring to is there's a condensation of the presentation of Trungpa Rinpoche's way of presenting the progression of shamatha that goes from what's called close attention to open awareness or an open technique. So close mindfulness or close shamatha is focused on in-breath and out-breath in this scheme, or at least just very sort of tightly on the breath and the posture. And then open is where there's more the focus on the out breath at least shifts to the space around oneself and the qualities of space such as they are. And then the beyond technique is where we drop technique at all. And this was actually a condensation of the progression that I believe John Rockwell created. And Trungpa Rinpoche did not actually have like such a neat, handy one, but he presents it in the 3 seminars where he presents the 4 foundations of mindfulness. He uses that progression of those foundations to track or to describe the progression from a very a meditation with characteristics with support on the body and the breath. And then he describes his second foundation of mindfulness goes famously from livelihood initially, which didn't really go over too well because people are thinking about their jobs, to life. And then in the 3rd seminar, he uses the term life force. And his description of it is the experience of sense perception and the experience of sensation in general. And then the 3rd one is mindfulness of effort, where it's just like this flash of awareness. And he talks about the watcher going from like a clunky watcher, so to speak, to an abstract watcher, to a transcendent watcher. And then his mindfulness of mind, basically, he says, is where you coordinate the other 3 together. He doesn't really add much there. But it's clear that the 3rd one, mindfulness of effort, is where there's no content to the shamatha experience. So thank you for mentioning that. And so I think John Rockwell's summary was quite brilliant, actually. Laurie, sorry.
So I'm having a little trouble with this scheme. It seems to me that you have shamatha where you're focusing on some sort of object, and that would be shamatha with support. And then you would have shamatha where you don't really have any object, which is this last thing that we were talking about, where you're just kind of open and there's no object, so there's no support. I don't get how you can have object with characteristics but no support. If you have an object, then that's your support, right? How am I not understanding this? I just don't. No one else is asking that question, so I
It
don't
is a
know.
confusing
What could that,
scheme.
any object that you have, most objects have characteristics. And if you have an object, then that's your support. I don't know.
So I need to, there's no echo finally. Good. So, like if we look back briefly to the beginning of the chapter, um, where does he lay it out?
And I did keep going back there. The object involving characteristics.
So on page 184,
Yes.
the actual objects for practicing mental stillness has two parts: objects for meditation involving characteristics and shamatha without characteristics. And those involving characteristics have two parts: with support and without support. And with support had sticks and stones, or twigs and pebbles, and um, objects of meditation involving characteristics without support is 189, is the breath, and then those that do not use the breath is on 193. So it really makes sense to go through these and get some familiarity with it.
Maybe I don't understand what they mean by an object of meditation, because
We'll read on 193. Let's read that paragraph. Those that do not use the breath. So this is characteristics without support, and he included breath in that. So their use of the term support really means like concrete support. In some texts or some translators use that clarification. That we're talking about like objective support. So the breath, in some way we can think of the breath as a real object, because we do breathe.
yeah,
Without it,
yeah,
we
to
die.
me it's an object. I mean, I'll go with them on that it's not really an object, but to me it's a support. To me it's a support, but so is a pebble and a twig.
Yes, yeah. So the difference between the two is not great. Mary Beth.
Um, if you visualize the form of the Buddha, is that a with characteristics but without support?
No, that's with both characteristics and support.
Even if you're just imagining that thing in front of you?
Well, that's what it says you end up doing, is you use your mental consciousness as the actual object for the shamatha. And so let's look at that 193, those that do not use the breath. When stillness has been achieved through those ancillary or prior practices,
Mm-hmm.
the mind is refined using the following that do not involve a support or a reference point. So I think he's using this scheme of support or reference point different than we would. Adopt the
Mm-hmm.
essential points for body. Do not do any practice that involves focusing or concentrating in the mind on anything, such as an external focal support or the comings and goings of the breath. So the breath was included in this section of without support, even though, which I think is the confusing part, because we would all feel like the breath is um, like a support, and
Yeah, yeah,
they're including as not support. So if you think
right.
like without a stationary concrete support, the
I
breath
see.
is a slippery substance, right? How
Mm-hmm.
long is a breath? How big is a breath?
Mm-hmm.
What's
Mm-hmm.
the shape of a breath? Where is it? When does it begin and end? You know, is a little bit dubious. We say the in breath and the out breath, but we go through this phase of contracting and relaxing our muscles. And is that the breath, or is the air the breath? And
Right,
um, you
right.
know,
Yeah, you can get
how
really,
much air? How is it all of the air that you take in, or we don't actually breathe out all of the air that we take in and things
So
like that.
let me ask a question. Part B, those that do not use the breath, is under the section, the objects of meditation involving characteristics without support.
Right.
So in part B, what is the object of meditation with
Yeah,
characteristics?
that's what we need to focus on is what's the difference between those that are with characteristics without support that do not use the breath and meditating without characteristics. We haven't gotten to without characteristics. So,
Right,
Sue, and
right,
then we'll go
yeah.
through this
Okay,
little.
so I just again go back to Chogyam Chopa's instructions, which, start body and then go out, but also 25%, So what does that mean when you have, like you're right on it, but it's only 25% on the object. So the other 75%, it's not that I don't think that it's flying all over the place. It's just not on a thing. So is that so?
Well, when asked, he explains that he means that 25% of our attention is on the breath, and then 75% is on other objects.
On other objects?
Yes, on other
Well, other
things.
elements of our experience. I don't think you would say, I mean, you could, whatever you want to call it, the word object is kind of undefined right now, but other elements of, environment, sensation, just basically all the other things that are going on besides the breath, right? It's into that 75.
Yes, which in this framework we would call objects, but he doesn't use that clunky language of objects. But yeah, he talks about the environment, he talks about the space, he talks about thoughts, talks about
Yeah, I
whatever
guess
else
I
happens.
I just thought about it as being like the just getting loose, like not too tight, not too loose, and so there's just that kind of line. But I'm gonna be quiet.
No, no,
And
I get everything you're saying. I think if if you literally read the words that they're using that he's using here, and I know it's used other places, to me, if you're doing, you can do shamatha with support and shamatha without support. And
I agree. This
this
additional like gloss of with
layer of,
characteristics and without
yeah,
is very
yeah,
confusing. So this
yeah,
description on 193 seems to be like it.
yeah,
So
that
so
would be,
let's just
yeah,
read this paragraph one more time and then let's take a look. We're right at the section of introducing without characteristics, and let's see
okay,
how he presents that and see if we can tell the difference of what he's getting at.
yeah,
So those that do not use the breath, 193, whatever stillness has been achieved through those ancillary practices for concentrating the mind is refined by using the following practices that do not involve a support or a reference point. Adopt the essential points of the bodies before. Do not do any practice that involves focusing or concentrating the mind on anything, such as on an external focal support or the internal comings and goings of the breath. Your mind should have no support at all and not be disturbed by any concepts about attention. Leave your mind in its own state. Do not think about the past, etc. So that's without support, but still in the realm of characteristics. So then in 195, we have shamatha without characteristics. Um, has two parts: the way to pursue flawless shamatha and identifying that flawless shamatha samadhi. So the way to pursue flawless shamatha has three sections, starting with knowing the vital points of tightening and relaxing, and then the techniques for each tightening and relaxing. So it seems like the discussion shifts from the object of meditation, or whether there is an object or not, to the experiencer so far.
right, yeah, yeah.
So at this point, texts on the stages of Mahamudra meditation teach the techniques for tightening and relaxing in keeping with the sutra-oriented explanations on how to dispel the faults of dullness and agitation in samadhi when we have developed some degree of mental stillness using the above ancillary practices for concentrating the mind. If the fault of dullness arises, it is dispelled by the techniques of tightening. And if the fault of agitation arises, it is cleared up by the techniques of relaxing. Generally speaking, there are many descriptions of what obscures samadhi, such as the list of agitation, remorse, sluggishness, drowsiness, doubt, pleasure-seeking, and malice found in the Sutra Unraveling the Intent. However, for the most part, they are all included in the categories of dullness and agitation, although sluggishness, drowsiness, and dullness do have their specific differences, since that sutra does not list them. The implication is that dullness and sluggishness are concordant types. Similarly, although there are specific remedies for each of those obscurations, since the text on the stage of the meditation consider that removing the faults of dullness and agitation alleviates most other problems, they explain only the ways to dispel the faults of dullness and agitation. Therefore, we should know how to identify and eliminate the cause of dullness and agitation, know how to recognize their characteristics, how to dispel them, as explained in the section of the Common Exposition of Shamatha and Vipassana. In brief, flawless shamatha samadhi requires both the presence of sharp clarity, which is the mind's lucidity, and the quality of stillness, which is to rest one-pointedly in non-conceptuality. The problems that afflict the former are created by dullness, and the problems that impede the latter are created by agitation. Since that is the case, dullness and agitation create the primary hindrances for sustaining samadhi, and the methods for dispelling them are critical. So those are the two big enemies, problems. Everything revolves down to dullness and agitation. The sutra-oriented text on the stage of meditation explain that when we have dullness, we should uplift our mind, bring joyful things to mind, concentrate on things characterized by illumination and so forth. When we experience agitation, we should contemplate impermanence, reflect on the disadvantages of distraction, cultivate shamatha, and so on. Here, however, we primarily banish dullness and agitation and pursue the key points of samadhi by tightening our mind or relaxing it. So here we primarily banish dullness and agitation and pursue the key points by tightening or relaxing our mind. Tightening works to resolve dullness and relaxing to resolve agitation. We must understand that the techniques lie in being aware of balance, not too tight, not too loose. Thinking is just this much tightening and relaxation without the fault of dullness, and is this much without the problem of agitation. And then we go through these. Debbie.
I'm mostly following along. This is wonderful. But it seems as if he's saying that, because I go back with, I think, Sue on, or somebody, or Laura on, differentiating characteristics from support. So it seems like here he's saying that the characteristics that he's referencing are dullness and agitation. So that we can be sitting without an object of support, but somehow we could still have the experience of having dullness or agitation.
It does seem to revolve around that, doesn't it? It just seems like the whole added layer of with and without characteristics confuses things. And certain other, or actually sort of many other Mahamudra texts don't have that added layer. They basically just have with support and without support. Or they call it with characteristics or without characteristics, but they don't have that like double layer thing going on, which makes it confusing. And so I think the key point is not to be confused about that. because it it seems to mean more to us than it does to him, right?
Oh no. Remember, may confusion dawneth. Wisdom.
That's great, Cynthia.
I was just going to say that aside from, yeah, that issue of the categories, what jumps out to me in this paragraph is just that what's happening is an increased subtleness in terms of how we're working with the mind dullness and agitation, because obviously dullness and agitation is kind of the perpetual boogeyman of our meditation, whatever you want to call it. But here they're talking about how we go from the little bit more stronger tactics like antidotes, contemplations of various kinds. And here it's, I think, a much more subtle tuning that we're talking about. So as the objects, or whatever we want to call them, become lesser and lesser, the methods for tuning up are also becoming more subtle.
Precisely. Thank you so much. Hit it right on the head. Thank you. That's great. That's very much the case. Techniques for tightening is predominantly used for all types of dullness, recommended by 9 out of 10 doctors for all types of dullness, but it may also be applied to certain types of agitation. Dullness is described as follows: when we're practicing with non-conceptual stillness, the force of the mindfulness perceiving that may gradually relax to the point where finally we lose our object of meditation, or it becomes unclear and our mind becomes lethargic, particularly if the object is without support. Like, it's very easy to get to stray into this dullness. And in a section later in the book, we'll go through these deviations or deviants, shamatha deviants. That is strong or coarse dullness. Alternatively, we may not lose our object of meditation, but our perception of that object may lack clarity, and we may be resting in a fuzzy way in just a non-conceptual state. That is subtle dullness, a blemished, unbroken dullness. The uneducated may consider the latter to be flawless shamatha. And I think many of us, or maybe I'll just speak for myself, have spent a lot of time in this type of shamatha, of just like thinking that we're there, but it like being a little bit too relaxed. If we sustain such subtle dullness and do not dispel it, sharp clarity will not emerge in our mind, and our mindfulness will become weak, our forgetfulness stronger, and so forth. As long as we do that, we create serious problems. The way to dispel that flaw is as follows. And I think that is one of the potential pitfalls of Trungpa Rinpoche's meditation practice, of like going beyond and just like being, ultimately it's like we take space, or a panoramic awareness of space as the framework, and that I think has led many practitioners into subtle dullness because of the lack of distinct object. The way to dispel that flaw is as follows, with the essential points for the bodies before. Raise your gaze, look straight ahead, reverse. So raise your gaze implies what? That your
That it
gaze
was
was
previously lowered.
that it was previously lowered, as if that's sort of taken for granted that the gaze is lowered. And this is interesting. Reverse any slackness or feeling of being dazed that may have come about by withdrawing your mind before. Expand your mind's vision. What does that mean? Expand your mind's vision. Make it spacious and vibrant. Make your mind spacious and vibrant. It's like a interior decorating your mind. Those are explained as being capable of dispelling dullness, as the synopsis of the Paramita says: uplift and stimulate your mind when it is slack. The Heart of the Middle Way also says, when your mind is slack, expand it by meditating with a vast focus space. In those techniques, banish coarse dullness. If those techniques banish coarse dullness but not subtle, you should train as follows: arouse sharp clarity, and tighten so that you're not distracted for even an instant. Without a reference point for ambitions, remain in a vibrant, crisp, awake, one-pointed mind. Do that for a short time and then interrupt it. Again, tighten up and rest your mind fully, not distracted for even a moment. Similar to before, presumably to gain um, understanding of of the subtlety of true clarity and alertness is. Having trained in that way, once your previous lethargic or fuzzy stillness has become a wakeful state. So stillness can be lethargic or fuzzy, by the way. Has become a wakeful state. Recognize the still mind to be vibrant, crisp, sharp, naked. To sum up, post the lookout of a vivid, sharp mind that detects whether dullness or agitation has arisen or is arising within a non-conceptual state. It's amazing how mind can be described in all these ways as if it like has these qualities: vibrant, crisp, sharp. You're just because your head comes to a point or something doesn't mean you're crisp, or is arising within a non-conceptual state. Maitreya's differentiation of middle and extreme says abandon dullness, agitation, or concepts. The last, meaning third, stages of meditation by Kamalashila advises look for dullness or the possibility of laxity, and continues look for agitation or the possibility of agitation. So this is a nuance of like noticing dullness and agitation that are sort of creeping up or incipient before they actually blossom, but like they're approaching, becoming accustomed to what is the feeling of going into dullness or going into agitation. Once it starts, once it's present, it's harder to dispel. So it's much better to like gain familiarity with what does it feel like as it approaches, and dispel it by tightening or loosening. This approach can arouse sharp mental clarity in some agitated states of mind, but if that only lasts for a short period of resting in non-conceptuality, do not see that as a fault. By training in short sessions repeatedly, flawless shamatha will arise. However, if you only develop a small degree of stillness, no matter what you do, you need to know how to let go without losing sharp clarity and train in that. How to let go without losing sharp clarity. And stillness. So we develop stillness. Constantly this language of like cultivating stillness, developing stillness as if it's like some thing or some quality that can become larger or smaller or different, right? Interesting way of referring to stillness. We'll see that may pose contradictory situations when we start looking at the nature of the still and moving mind in later sections. Shall we pause there? Any final comments? Rob.
Yeah, it's like what Cynthia was saying. This is where that subtle analysis is happening constantly in the background. I mean, so, and that's what you're alluding to now with what is the difference between still and moving when this analysis is happening. It's like a non-conceptual analysis of sorts. It's just the analysis of knowing, oh, is this coming to a certain point or not? And am I as crisp as I was before without having to say all that? It's like cognition is happening all the time, but it's not conceptual necessarily.
Yeah. Additionally, what I'm asking about is the still mind, is stillness like a type of mind or a part of mind? What is stillness? If we're able to increase it, if we're able to cultivate it, like grow it, what is stillness? Is it like a faculty of mind? Like prajna is a faculty of mind, and we can increase our prajna by doing exercises, by listening and contemplating. We can increase our mindfulness by intentionally focusing on the practice of mindfulness. Can we increase stillness? Can we create still mind? So that's something to think about. Lori.
Yeah, I mean, I just had this thought before you said that maybe it's not so much something you increase, but rather it's always there and you learn to identify it, you find it.
That's great. So it's there, and we begin to sort of what Rob referred to earlier as shifting our allegiance. It's like
That's
our
it.
allegiance is focused so much on the content. Like our whole world is the content, and that's like the foreground of a photograph or a painting. It's like those are the important things in
We're
our
always in the
experience.
foreground. Yeah,
The
yeah.
and then it's like shifting and looking around it, like what's around all
With
of
all
the
this.
objects,
Mhm.
and that's, I think, also what Trungpa Rinpoche gets at a lot with panoramic awareness and the when he's asked to define the difference between shamatha and vipassana. He says that shamatha is like focused on the object or the breath, and vipassana sort of goes around the object or the breath. Um, Kevin and then Chris.
Yeah, maybe it's really like uncovering it, simply uncovering it, digging it. It's there, but we have to uncover it from what we've learned throughout our life to let our mind be busy.
Yeah, either, like earlier, Lori was saying, discover it, or as Kevin is saying, uncover it. So that implies that it's there. As Kevin said, it's been there all along, and Lori said, and we're just noticing it. And so, is it a part of our mind, or is it, how does it relate to the content? How does it relate to movement? What's the relationship? Is something good to think about. Chris.
Yeah, it's interesting what he's saying there because without an object, I did find dullness did come in much more. Uh, I couldn't sustain shamatha,
Yeah,
but
it's very hard.
and that's what he seems to be saying. Like, okay, if you don't use an object, dullness is going to come in more, and it did. I really couldn't hold it as much, but yeah. So maybe I'm in the right path. I don't know.
I think so. I think that's the brilliance of Trungpa Rinpoche's technique is out breath, where you touch on content in a focused way, and then in breath, let go and relax. And we're just constantly doing that alternation and training in that. And the breath, you might say that's content, that's movement. Being mindful of the breath is movement. Is it a thought? Is the breath a thought? He calls the body a thought, the psychosomatic body, and he pretty much says the same about the breath, that those are thoughts. And basically, we've seen in this more traditional literature that those are conceptual objects. We're focusing on them with our
Yeah,
mental
that
consciousness.
that's why I didn't like the breath because I was like, it's a thought. It's my thought about breathing. My body breathes. I don't breathe, and so that's why I dropped it. Sometimes I would negate it. I would say that. I would say, no, I don't breathe. My body breathes, just to negate the breath and then
So your
focus.
body breathes. That's so cool. So your body
So
breathes.
who's this I that is identifying, what are you identifying the I with?
The third eye.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, good questions. Good things to ponder. Like what are we frickin' doing as we're meditating? What is our experience? And what are they talking about? Movement, stillness. So let's close there on techniques for relaxing. We'll start with next Tuesday. And then we'll finish up this chapter 224. Yeah, we should be able to, somewhere around there. Dedication of merits. By this merit may all attain omniscience, may defeat the enemy wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom, may the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled, may all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory. Thank you, everyone. Great to see you,
Thank you,
or
Thank
at
you.
Peter.
least, or at least see your
Bye.
name.
Right.
Right.
Be well. Take care. See you soon. Oh, recording.